let's talk about suggestions as well, because we do know that when it comes to many clubs, and Chelsea's one of them, a striker really would be something that would be very nice to have right now, James. Is there any news on the Lukaku situation or Victor Osimhen coming in?
Well, they're continuing to talk to each other, the two clubs, about those two deals. I mean, fundamentally, it comes down to valuations for both. There's also an issue with Lukaku's wages. I don't think that is sort of the main sticking point. I think Lukaku wants to go back to Italy. He wants to work with Antonio Conte. But Chelsea value him quite highly, and similarly with Osimhen, I don't think, although they're quite willing to make that part of the making part of the transaction, I think there's just again a valuation disparity that they've just not resolved yet. I think Antonio Conte actually inadvertently has probably done Chelsea a bit of a favour by kicking off at Napoli already, and sort of complaining about the state of play there and the lack of activity and sort of the lack of clarity he has around his squad. So he's kind of done his bit, and then we'll see if the two clubs can come to an agreement. I mean, I think the Lukaku part of it will happen. I think he will move to Napoli in some form. I think it would suit all parties now if Osimhen did go to Stamford Bridge, but Chelsea are walking a fine line with PSR. That a lot of what we're talking about here with the sort of 7, 8, 9-year contracts and the selling of the academy players and all these kind of things, it's accounting trickery to make sure they comply with the rules. And they're not in a position where they can just go and say, right, what do you want for Osimhen? Here it is. They're having to sort of negotiate, and I imagine part of the problem is they've got to get some of these players off the books. They can't just go and do Osimhen as well. They don't really count Lukaku. I mean, obviously he is technically among the first team squad, but he's been out on loan the last 2 seasons. I don't think they really consider him part of that group. They need to whittle that 40, 41 as it is now down quite considerably before they think about trying to do an Osimhen on big wages before the end of the window.
Jan, let's try and put a positive spin on this if we can, because they have brought up some of the best young soccer talent, and we do see some of the players and the potential that they have in this team. Can you see a scenario in a few years' time where this does start to come together for Chelsea?
Well, first of all, Kay, thank you for letting the guys have the easy part of taking Chelsea down.
You're welcome.
Well, if I will start with the striker, I mean, the positive thing for Chelsea fans, maybe there is someone upstairs after buying 100 players, maybe they get up to idea, you know what, we need a striker. I mean, that is fine, buy it. So it's hard to find a positive thing. The positive thing is, of course, they got a bunch of lads is going to be the devil's advocate for Chelsea at the moment. They got some very talented players there. I understand Maresca talking about 6-7 years deal by the players. I guess there is not a big chance that a Chelsea coach will stay that long. So I don't think that he's bothered about that. But of course, they've set together a good set of lads. At the end of the last season, Chelsea were good. They were winning games. They got himself into Europe. What did they do? Well, Pochettino was gone. Maresca is coming in. I think they got a fine coach. I think they got a coach that can sort these kind of things out to get a good team together. But I'm just very worried that if he is supposed to be calm, talking about how he's creating his midfield, the balance in midfield, how many of the young players can he get in there? Still, they're going to be trouble with all these things that are happening at the moment, because statistically, as James is saying, you can get away 2-3 players, but if you have to start with 10-15 who's going to be bad apples in your dressing room, I'm not saying the Chelsea players are, but just statistically, some players will be. And then I'm not sure that Maresca would have the best way of could handle that. That's the most positive I could be at the moment. And the last positive thing is whatever happened to Chelsea, they will have players for another 10 years.
There you go.
Okay.
Great little spin doctor for ESPN FC.
Unpositive, positive thing I've heard.
That's a long time.
Kind of positive.
10 years is a long time.
Kind of.
But speaking of the future, how long, James, will Enzo Maresca be given, or is he just going to be the fall guy this season?
Well, I've always said this about the Chelsea model. I think this element is often underplayed, is that, it's all well and good saying we're collecting this incredibly talented group of players and we're putting them on these long 6, 7, 8, 9-year contracts. And again, I think a point worth making is they would argue, and they've tried to suggest that a lot of these players have signed on lower wages with the wage increases built into the contracts incrementally as they hopefully improve and they deliver silverware and they succeed at the club. So they're trying to argue that their wage bill is lower by doing this over a longer period of time and incentivising the player through the contract. But the problem is that if it goes wrong and you've got 25 players on 6+ year contracts, what is it easy to change? The playing staff or the backroom staff? You know, the manager is always the fall guy anyway, but in this scenario, when you've got these players on these such long-term deals, if you fall out with one of them and it becomes, well, it's either him or it's me, very, very difficult for the manager to then sort of say, to ride that out and try and outlast a player who knows he's sit there, he doesn't have to do anything, and he's got money coming in for 6, 7, 8 years. I mean, that's obviously the sort of extreme kind of toxic example. But I just think the whole model puts so much pressure on the head coach to get it right, because he is the most easily interchangeable aspect of the whole model. And look, I don't think there's a lot of goodwill towards him. I think, from speaking to some of the Chelsea fans, I think they sort of feel that he's a bit of a mouthpiece for the Bowley Clearlake era. I think they feel that he could be standing up a little bit more to it, expressing himself, maybe conveying a bit more of his sense of personality. And as the guys have said, it comes back to results. If he starts winning games, they'll get on board quickly. But his style is quite high risk. He wants them to play out from the back. He wants them to take risks. I covered them a little bit in pre-season. He talked about choosing how we concede goals. We accept we are going to concede goals playing this way. Well, that's all well and good, but if you're not winning the games and you haven't already got that goodwill and that buy-in, it could go south very quickly. He is under a little bit of pressure to hit the ground running, and I think everybody would sort of say, look, City at home, opening weekend of the season, you lose that. And I thought they played well for patches, particularly in the second half. I think you'd say, OK, let's draw a line under that and move on. But if he doesn't start winning the first few games, he could be in trouble. He could be in trouble.
He was negative again. It's only me that have to be positive, isn't it?
He's the one who has to sit through the press conferences all the time, OK? And you guys can keep up to date with everything that's going on. Thank you so much for being with us.
Kind of positive, Jan. Kind of positive.
Negative. Anyway, thanks for being with us today, James Olley. Keep up to date with all the ins and outs. And likely more to come at Chelsea over on our Transfer Talk website, espnfc.com for that. And of course, all the latest talk on what's going on in and around the